Today we'll be showing how to test and replace a rear oxygen sensor. Specifically, we'll show on how to test if power is getting to the sensor, testing the sensor itself, and removing it from the vehicle. To do this job, we'll be using a few things: flathead screwdriver, digital multimeter. You'll see exactly why we need this when it comes to testing the sensor. This is an oxygen sensor removal tool. I'll talk more about this when we get to the sensor. 1/2-inch extension, okay, and this is a 1/2-inch size ratchet to remove the sensor, and a 45-degree pair of pliers. Now, to get to the sensor, I need to remove this air intake duct. This leads to the air filter, just held on by 2 plastic tabs here. Flathead tabs, remove it. Slight pull up on the screwdriver, and it comes right out. Okay. Now once that part is removed, we can clearly see the front oxygen sensor, or the air fuel sensor. That's what we tested and replaced last week. And then if you take a look at this wire, this runs to the rear oxygen sensor. I'll get a better light in there so you guys can see it better. But that being said, on many vehicles, typically you'll find that the wiring for the front and rear sensor are very, very close to each other. So I needed to do a few things. Number one, there's a clip down there, right down here, that I need to just unclip to remove it from the bracket. Yikes. Okay, now to remove this clip, I'm just using the 45-degree pair of pliers here, and on the rear, just going to clamp down and then push. Oh, let me do that again. There we go. Okay, so we're just clamping down right here. That's all we're doing. Now right here where my thumb is, there's a tab. You press down the tab and you pull back. Don't pull on the wires. There we go. And that's it. So now the sensor is disconnected from the harness connector. Now the next step I want to do is test the harness connector. Now the reason behind that is because I want to verify that power is getting to this connector. Because if power is not getting to that connector, then power cannot travel to the oxygen sensor, okay? So I want to verify that. Now to do that, we'll turn on the ignition key, don't start the vehicle, and then we'll be using the multimeter to take a voltage reading. Now if you've never used a multimeter, they're easy enough to use. Lowe's, Home Depot, Sears, Amazon, they all carry it, typically between $20 to $25. You have a number of different settings. In this case, we want to test the volts, DC. So AC is your household current, DC is what we want to test on the vehicle. Now with the multimeter, you have 2 leads. You have a red lead and a black lead. Black is ground, that's any good metal point on the vehicle. So your black lead, you would touch to any good metal point. The red lead, let me show you where you touch this on the harness connector. Now on the harness connector we have 4 connection points. Now the question becomes, which point do we touch? The best thing you can do is download the factory repair manual for your vehicle, because in that manual it will show you exactly which tab to touch. But let's say for example you don't know. You can actually, by process of elimination, touch each tab and we should see at least 10 volts worth of voltage. So let's see what we come back with. So again, the black lead is going to engine ground, which is any good metal point, and the red lead will touch directly to this harness connector and we should see at least 10 volts. Ideally you want to see battery voltage, but if I touch number 2 here, terminal 2, we have 13.6 volts. So that verifies that power is getting to this harness connector, which is a good sign. That means that the wiring in the back leading to this plastic housing is in good shape. Now if you're not getting a reading here, you gotta check the wiring. But let's say for example, you're not sure which prong to touch here. If we do terminal 1 here, we have 0.2 volts, incredibly too low. Number 3 here, we have 0.01, and this guy in the bottom left, we don't have a reading at all. So that verifies, by process of elimination, we know that this is the right prong. But again, if you're not getting any reading here, you gotta check the wiring leading into this harness connector, because you have a break, or maybe sometimes these prongs get pushed out of the harness connector, or the body of the housing here. So now we know that power is getting to the sensor. So now we need to test the sensor itself. Again, you need the multimeter. But in this case, we're going to use the ohm setting. That's the omega symbol. Now, on this vehicle, typically we want to see between 5 to 7 ohms. And I did check other vehicles as well. That's a pretty good guideline. Now, if you do this test and you don't get a reading here, or it's an incredibly high reading, for example, on the front oxygen sensor, anything over 50 ohms was no good. For this specific vehicle, there was really no reading on what the maximum level should be, but typically if it's incredibly high where you don't get a reading here at all, the sensor is bad. So what I'm going to do again is take the 2 leads. Let me get this into all one view here. Okay, so again I have the 2 leads coming from the multimeter, and I'm going to touch the top 2 leads. So this guy right here and this guy right here. It does not matter which lead touches which prong. So in other words, the black lead can go here or vice versa. It doesn't make a difference. Just touch the 2 leads. Let's see what we have here. So as you can see, we have 5.6, 5.8 ohms. So that verifies that this sensor is working correctly. Now again, if you don't know which prongs to touch, the best thing to do is obtain the repair manual for your vehicle. A lot of times you can download them off sites, because every vehicle is a little bit different regarding which prongs to touch. But you can also try a Google image search. But by process elimination, you could figure it out eventually, but the best thing is just get that repair manual for your vehicle so you can pinpoint exactly what to do. Now let's say you're not getting a reading here, or the reading is incredibly high and you need to replace the sensor. Let's go ahead and do that. Now to get to the sensor, I'm going to remove the bottom tray. Chances are I can remove it from up top, but it's really hard to video that, and chances are many of you will have to do it from underneath the vehicle. So I have a 10mm bolt right here. There's another one in the rear over there, and we'll go ahead and remove this plastic cover. Now in some vehicles you may find plastic tabs, and if you have plastic tabs, I'll include a link to quite a number of years ago we replaced a front bumper. I think it was a front bumper on an Acura TL, and that has a number of plastic clips, and I'll include a link and you can see exactly how you can remove the clips without breaking not even one of them. And if you do have clips and you do break them, you can typically find them eBay, Amazon, specific for your vehicle. Okay. And with that front cover removed, you can clearly see the oxygen sensor. So again, I'm going to get some PB Blaster sprayed on the threads, and we'll go ahead and remove it. Now of course it goes without saying, make sure the exhaust is nice and cool. And in fact, if you actually try to do this job when the exhaust is quite warm, you can actually ruin the exhaust, so make sure it's nice and cool. Now I'm just going to let that sit for a few minutes. Now we're going to use the adapter here. Now if you're curious on the size, it's 7/8 of an inch, and you just place it right over the sensor. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight, and you grab your, let me put the camera down, but we're going to use the ratchet here and remove it from the exhaust. Now I do have a small extension. Again, it's a 1/2 inch drive. Place it over, make sure it's nice and tight. Again, these can be, in this case, 8 years old, 120,000 miles. So make sure it's nice and tight, and here we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yo, there we go. Okay. Now in this case, as you can see, the sensor is fine. I'm just doing this as a how-to. But if you are removing any oxygen or air fuel sensor, never ever touch the tip, because that will ruin the sensor very, very quickly. And there we go. So in other words, right here, you never ever want to touch, okay? So if you are replacing it with the new sensor, or again, if you have to remove the sensor for any reason, when you reinstall it, never ever touch the end of that element. Now if you're curious on the size of that extension, it was 2 1/8 of an inch. Now when we reinstall the sensor, either if it's brand new or if you're just reinstalling the old sensor, you just want to put a touch of anti-seize compound. Now someone did ask on the previous video when we did the air fuel sensor, if I cleaned the element. And again, the answer is no. You don't want to touch the end of the sensor. Boy, this brush is horrible. But that being said, put some anti-seize compound on and reinstall the sensor. Now when it comes time to tightening down the sensor, you don't want to over tighten it. From the factory, it's typically around 15, maybe 18 foot-pounds typically. So that what that means essentially is don't over tighten it, because you don't want to strip out the threads or ruin the exhaust. Okay. So now I'm just reinstalling the undercover here. Go ahead and reinstall the harness connector. Don't forget about the clip on the bottom. And when you reinstall these connectors, they only go in one way, so don't worry about somehow being backwards. Okay.